The morning sky over Washington, D.C. shattered into rainbow fragments as the first Krexthery ship descended through the clouds. Emily Thompson stood at her office window in the Pentagon, her coffee growing cold in her hands as she watched the crystalline vessel catch the dawn light. The ship looked like a cathedral made of diamond and starlight, its elegant spires and sweeping arches defying everything humans thought they knew about spacecraft design. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Colonel Richards asked, coming to stand beside her. "Engineering says it's at least 2 miles long." Emily didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the way the ship moved, something about its motion setting off warning bells in her mind. After 15 years of analyzing threat patterns for the CIA, she'd learned to trust her instincts. "Too beautiful," she finally said, "like an anglerfish's lure." Richards chuckled, but it was a nervous sound. Always the optimist, Thompson. More ships were appearing now, emerging from the cloud cover like crystal angels. The news networks were going wild, their chirons screaming about humanity's first contact. Social media had practically melted down. Even the Pentagon's usually stoic staff were clustering at the windows, phones raised to capture the historic moment. Emily set her coffee down and returned to her desktop. While everyone else watched the show, she had work to do. The aliens had been broadcasting the same message for the past hour, a request for direct communication with Earth's leaders. The translation matrix was still processing their language, but initial results were promising. She pulled up the first successfully translated clip. The Krexthery ambassador's holographic form was hauntingly beautiful, its crystalline body refracting light like living diamond. But something about its movement patterns nagged at her. Emily started cross-referencing the ambassador's gestural language against her database. She built this system during her CIA days, using it to analyze the body language of world leaders and potential security threats. Now she fed the aliens' movements into it, frame by frame. The first results made her sit up straight. "Colonel," she called out, not taking her eyes off the screen. "I need you to see this." Richards reluctantly pulled himself away from the window. "What am I looking at?" "Movement analysis of the Krexthery ambassador," Emily said, pulling up side-by-side comparisons. "Look at these patterns. They're practically identical to predatory behavior in Earth species. The way it moves its head, that's a wolf tracking prey. That gesture it keeps making with its upper limbs matches a mantis shrimp's strike position. They're aliens, Thompson. Of course, their body language is going to seem strange. It's not strange, it's familiar. Too familiar." She pulled up more comparisons. "These are deeply embedded behavioral patterns. And their translator. Watch this." She played another clip. The ambassador was discussing cultural exchange, but the translation matrix kept glitching on certain words. Emily had highlighted them all. "See how it stutters when discussing human art, religion, music? But look how smooth it runs when they talk about our military capabilities, our resources, our population centers." Richard's expression was growing more serious. "Could be a processing issue, or it could be intent," Emily countered. "Their language processing is perfect when they're gathering strategic information. It only glitches when they have to discuss things they consider irrelevant, things they don't care about getting right." She stood up, gesturing at the beautiful ships still descending through the morning sky. "Think about it. They show up with overwhelming force, but packaged in the most aesthetically pleasing way possible. They request immediate access to world leaders. Their first message talks about peace, while their ships take up perfect strategic positions over every major city. Does that sound like a diplomatic mission to you, or a well-practiced military operation?" Richards was silent for a long moment, looking between her screen and the window. Finally, he pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the Joint Chiefs. Keep digging. I want everything you can find on their communication patterns." Emily was already turning back to her computer as he left. Outside, the crystal ships continued their graceful dance through the sky, beautiful and deadly as Venus flytraps. She had 72 hours to prove her theory before the Krex theory's first official diplomatic meeting. She just hoped it wouldn't be too late. 3 months of tense cultural exchange had done nothing to ease Emily Thompson's concerns. If anything, each passing day had only strengthened her conviction that the Krex theory were playing a long game. She sat in the back of the United Nations Assembly Hall, watching the alien ambassador's crystalline form shimmer under the bright lights of international media coverage. The Global Broadcasting Center had spared no expense for this historic conference. Billions were watching as humanity prepared to sign its first interstellar trade agreement. The ambassador's holographic projection towered 20 feet high above the assembly floor, its faceted body casting rainbow patterns across the gathered diplomats. Emily's tablet quietly recorded every movement, every subtle shift in the alien's posture. 3 months of data had revealed patterns that kept her awake at night. The way the ambassador's upper crystalline segments tilted when discussing Earth's military capabilities, a predator sizing up its prey. The slight pause before each reference to human culture, contempt masked by diplomatic protocol. Your species has shown remarkable adaptability, the ambassador was saying, its harmonious voice echoing through the hall. We have added 73 civilizations to our collection, but few have embraced the exchange process with such enthusiasm. Emily's fingers froze over her tablet. Collection, not coalition, not community. Her translation matrix hadn't glitched this time. The ambassador continued, either unaware of or unconcerned by its slip. Perhaps we should share some examples of how other species have benefited from our guidance. The hologram shifted, displaying images of alien worlds. But Emily saw what others missed: the empty cities, the standardized architecture, the absence of any cultural markers. These weren't thriving civilizations. They were factory farms. She was already moving, pushing through the crowd toward Colonel Richards at the front when the ambassador's voice changed. The harmonic tones dropped away, revealing something cold and ancient underneath. Of course, not all species understand their place immediately. Some require demonstration. The hologram expanded, filling the entire hall. The assembly erupted in gasps as they found themselves surrounded by images of planetary devastation. Worlds cracked open like eggs, their resources stripped bare. Civilizations reduced to labor camps, their art and culture replaced by efficient production lines. We have done this 73 times, the ambassador stated, all pretense of diplomacy gone. We perfect societies. We eliminate inefficiency. Those who accept this role thrive under our guidance. Those who resist. The images shifted to show shattered worlds, their surfaces glassed by weapons beyond human understanding. Emily finally reached Richards, who was already barking orders into his phone. Above them, the ambassador's form had grown to fill the entire ceiling, its crystalline body now resembling nothing so much as a massive faceted spider poised above its web. You have 72 hours to submit to integration, the ambassador announced. Your resources will be cataloged. Your industries will be optimized. Your cultural inefficiencies will be eliminated. This is not a negotiation. A hologram vanished, plunging the hall into darkness. When the lights returned, chaos erupted. Diplomats rushed for exits, security teams scrambled to protect their leaders, and the media broadcast the end of human independence to a stunned global audience. Still think I was being paranoid? Emily asked Richards as they rushed toward the emergency command center being set up in the building's basement. No time for "I told you so," he replied, though she caught the grim acknowledgement in his voice. We need options. Emily clutched her tablet, 3 months of data analysis running through her mind. I have a theory, she said as they descended the stairs. They're perfect predators, right? Everything about them is evolved for maximum efficiency. But what if that's their weakness? What if they're too perfect? Richards paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking at her. Explain. They've never failed before. 73 successes, 0 losses. They don't know how to handle resistance because they've never had to learn. A plan was taking shape in her mind, built on everything she'd observed about their psychology. What if we could show them something they've never seen before? The emergency lights cast red shadows as alarms began to sound throughout the building. Above them, the crystal ships were moving into attack positions. They had 72 hours to save Earth. Emily Thompson allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the deadliest predators were the ones who had never learned to fear their prey. The underground bunker beneath the Pentagon hummed with desperate energy. 64 hours remained until the Krex theory's deadline, and Emily Thompson was running on her 6th cup of coffee. Holographic displays surrounded her workstation, each one showing different aspects of the aliens' behavior patterns. "You're looking at it wrong," a voice said behind her. "Stop thinking like an analyst." She turned to find a man in rumpled civilian clothes, his gray hair wild, and his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Dr. Marcus Reynolds looked more like an absent-minded professor than the military's leading expert on historical warfare. "Dr. Reynolds," Emily said, standing. "Colonel Richards said you might have insight into why a species that can travel between stars is giving us 3 days to surrender instead of just wiping us out." He moved to her displays, gesturing at the footage of Krex theory ships. "They're not just predators. They're perfect predators, and that's their fatal flaw." Emily watched as he rearranged her data streams, creating new patterns. "I don't follow." "Look at Earth's history," Reynolds said, pulling up images of ancient cave paintings. "Humans started as prey. We were slower, weaker, and more vulnerable than most large predators. But we became the dominant species. Know why?" "Adaptability," Emily suggested. "Persistence," Reynolds corrected. "We weren't the strongest or the fastest, so we learned to be the most stubborn, the most creative, the most unpredictable." He gestured at the Krex theory footage. "But look at them. Every movement is perfect, every strategy optimized. They've never had to adapt because they've never needed to." Emily's mind raced, connecting dots she hadn't seen before. That's why their translation matrix glitches on cultural references. They can't process concepts that don't serve a clear evolutionary purpose. Exactly. Reynolds' eyes lit up. Art, music, dance. These aren't inefficiencies. They're adaptations. Humans create because we had to learn to think beyond pure survival. We tell stories because we needed to pass on complex strategies. We make music because we had to coordinate as groups. He pulled up the images of the Krex theory's conquered worlds. See the pattern. They don't just conquer species, they optimize them. Strip away everything they consider inefficient until only the perfect, productive colony remains. Emily leaned forward, her exhaustion forgotten. But they've never faced a species that evolved like we did, one that turned its weaknesses into strengths. Now you're getting it. Reynolds started pacing, his energy infectious. Look at human military history. Our greatest victories often came when we were outgunned, outmanned, and seemingly doomed. The Persian Empire against Greek city-states, the Spanish Armada against English weather knowledge, guerrilla fighters against modern armies. He turned back to her displays. The Krex theory fight like perfect predators because that's what they are. Every strategy is based on overwhelming force and absolute dominance. But what happens when you fight an enemy that doesn't play by predator rules? Emily's fingers flew over her keyboard, pulling up new analysis parameters. Their ships, the crystalline structure, it's beautiful, but it's rigid. No redundancy, no room for error because they've never needed it. And their society must be the same, Reynolds added. Rigid hierarchy, perfect obedience, no capacity for individual innovation, because why would a perfect species need to improve? The plan started taking shape in Emily's mind. "We don't try to match their strength," she said slowly. "We don't fight like predators at all. We fight like humans." Reynolds finished, a fierce grin on his face. "We use every dirty trick, every unexpected strategy, every inefficient cultural practice they've dismissed as worthless. We show them why evolution favored creativity over perfection." Emily was already reaching for her phone to call Colonel Richards. Outside the bunker, the world's military forces were mobilizing for what they thought would be a hopeless last stand. But now she saw a different path. "Dr. Reynolds," she said, "how would you like to help me design the most imperfect, inefficient, and thoroughly human battle plan in history?" His eyes sparkled with the same mad creativity that had built humanity's first tools, painted the first cave art, and turned a species of prey into the most dangerous force the galaxy had never expected. "My dear," he said, "I thought you'd never ask." The United Nations Security Council chamber had never looked more defeated. Heads of state slumped in their chairs, military leaders stared at the floor, and the Krex Theory ambassador's hologram loomed above them, all like a crystal spider savoring its web. Only Emily Thompson and Dr. Reynolds, seated in the back, seemed alert. "We accept your terms," the UN Secretary-General announced, his voice heavy with apparent despair. "Humanity will submit to integration." Emily watched the ambassador's reaction through her augmented display. Its crystalline form shifted in exactly the way she'd predicted, the subtle preening of an apex predator savoring its kill. Perfect, predictable, exploitable. "A wise choice," the ambassador said, its harmonics dripping with satisfaction. "Our ships will begin landing in major population centers within the hour. Prepare your people for processing." The transmission ended, and the chamber erupted in controlled activity. What had looked like defeat was transformed as military leaders pulled out secured tablets and politicians straightened their spines. The performance was over. "Operation Trojan Horse is go," Colonel Richards announced, his voice crisp. "Everyone knows their roles. We have one shot at this." Emily's phone buzzed with updates from around the globe. Everything was moving according to their carefully orchestrated plan. A plan so chaotic, so inefficient, so utterly human that the Krex Theory's perfect minds would never see it coming. "The beauty of it," Dr. Reynolds said, as they hurried through underground corridors to the command center, "is that they'll ignore every warning sign. Their evolution never prepared them for deception on this scale." The command center was a hive of controlled chaos. Screens showed Krex Theory ships beginning their landing approaches over cities worldwide, each one following their perfect, predictable patterns. "Status report," Emily called out, taking her station. "Phase 1 active." A lieutenant responded. "Social media seeds are planted. Underground networks are going dark according to schedule. Resistance cells are in position." Dr. Reynolds watched the patterns with academic fascination. "Look at their landing formations. Exactly the same as every other world they've conquered. They're not even trying to adapt their strategy." Emily nodded, her eyes on the larger picture. Because why would they? 73 successful conquests using the same playbook. They think they're reading our surrender perfectly. The defeated species accepting its place in their collection. Little do they know, Reynolds chuckled, we're actually following a much older human playbook, one that predates written history. On the screens, the first Krex Theory ground forces were deploying. Their crystal armor caught the sunlight as they moved through empty streets, their formations perfect and vulnerable. "Confirmation from Moscow," another analyst called out. "Their forces are taking the bait, moving to secure the hidden bunkers we leaked." "Same in Beijing," someone else added. "They're spreading their forces exactly as predicted." Emily allowed herself a small smile. The Krex theory were following every false lead, every carefully planted piece of misinformation. Their perfect minds never questioning why a defeated species would leave such clear intelligence behind. "Sir," a young analyst called out, intercepted communication from their fleet commander. They're congratulating each other on the easiest conquest yet. Dr. Reynolds laughed out loud. Pride before the fall. They've never learned to question success because they've never experienced failure. Emily watched as more reports flooded in. The Krex theory were walking into their trap with the same perfect precision. They did everything else. Their forces spreading thinner and thinner, chasing shadows and securing non-existent threats. "It's time," she said, looking at Colonel Richards. "Give the signal." Richards nodded and pressed his command key. Across the globe, hidden resistance cells received their go orders. The real Operation Trojan Horse was about to begin. "You know," Dr. Reynolds said quietly, "the original Trojans lost because they never imagined their enemies would use such an inefficient, irrational strategy." Emily watched the dots representing Krex theory forces continue their perfect, predictable deployment. History has a way of repeating itself, Doctor, especially when you're too perfect to learn from it. The screen showed the sun setting over cities worldwide, casting long shadows that would soon hide humanity's first acts of resistance. The Krex theory had come expecting to find sheep ready for slaughter. They were about to learn why humans had always been better at playing the wolf in sheep's clothing. Emily Thompson stood in the heart of the underground command center, watching as Operation Mockingbird went live across every digital platform on Earth. Around her, screens displayed the chaos unfolding in real time as humanity launched its first true counterattack, not with bullets or bombs, but with the most powerful weapon humans had ever created: information. "Signal strength at maximum," a communications officer reported. "The Krex theory communication networks are picking up our bait." Dr. Reynolds leaned forward, his eyes gleaming behind his glasses as he watched their cultural weapon take effect. "Beautiful," he murmured, "like watching an immune system attack itself." On the main screen, their carefully crafted disinformation campaign began to work its magic. Leaked documents appeared on human networks, seemingly desperate messages about hidden planetary defense systems embedded in population centers. The Krex theory's perfect intelligence gathering systems snatched up every byte. "They're responding," Emily announced, tracking the alien fleet's movements. Multiple ships breaking formation to investigate the new targets. They're not even questioning the intelligence. Colonel Richards nodded grimly, because their evolution never taught them to question information from a defeated enemy. Why would prey lie when it's already lost? The screen showed Krex theory ground forces redirecting, their perfect formations splitting apart as they rushed to secure non-existent threats. Each false lead had been crafted to appeal to their predatory psychology, the promise of hidden weapons too dangerous to ignore. "Phase 2, Emily called out. "Launch the mimetic attack." Across the globe, human resistance cells activated their parts of the plan. Social media exploded with carefully designed viral content, images, videos, and stories that the Krex theory's logic centers couldn't process properly. Their translation systems began to glitch as they tried to parse human cultural references they'd previously dismissed as irrelevant. "Look at their command structure," Dr. Reynolds said, pointing to a display showing alien communication patterns. "They're starting to tangle themselves up. Their perfect hierarchy doesn't know how to handle information that doesn't fit their categories." Emily watched as the Krex theory's rigid command structure began to show its first cracks. Lower-ranking officers, faced with conflicting intelligence they couldn't ignore but couldn't process, started requesting direct clarification from their superiors. The perfect chain of command began to clog with uncertainty. "Launch the next wave," she ordered. "Let's see how they handle some good old-fashioned human chaos." New signals began broadcasting. fragments of military communications suggesting massive troop movements that didn't exist, emergency protocols that led nowhere, and coordinates for weapon stockpiles that were actually civilian cultural centers. Their ground forces are splitting up even further, an analyst reported. They're trying to secure every target simultaneously. Their formation integrity is down to 30%. Dr. Reynolds laughed. Of course they are. They've never learned to prioritize because they've never had to. Every target must be equal because their perfect minds can't accept leaving any stone unturned. The screens showed the results of their strategy. Krek's theory forces, spread thin across the globe, were breaking apart their usually impeccable attack formations. Their crystal ships hovered in increasingly isolated positions as they tried to cover every reported threat. "Sir," a junior officer called out, "we're detecting frequency changes in their ship-to-ground communications. They're starting to question their own intelligence reports." Emily shared a knowing look with Dr. Reynolds. This was what they'd been waiting for, the first crack in the perfect predator's confidence. "Send in the street teams," she ordered. "It's time to show them why humans invented theater." Across every major city, carefully prepared resistance cells began their performances. Flash mobs appeared and disappeared before Krek's theory forces could respond. Holographic projections made small groups look like armies. Sound systems played phantom troop movements through underground tunnel networks. "They're trying to adapt their tactics," Colonel Richards noted, watching the alien response. "But look, every new formation is still perfect, still by the book. They don't know how to improvise." Emily nodded, her eyes on the larger pattern emerging. The Krek's theory were fighting exactly as she predicted, like perfect predators faced with prey that refused to follow the rules of the hunt. "Humanity's greatest strength," she said quietly, "has always been our ability to turn chaos into strategy. Now let's show them why evolution favored the trickster over the perfect hunter." The streets of London erupted in a flash of color and sound as 500 civilians suddenly broke into a choreographed dance number. Krek's theory ground forces froze in their perfect formation, their crystalline forms catching the morning light as their logic centers struggled to process the scene. Flash mob in London engaging hostile forces. The report came through to the Pentagon's command center. Enemy units are responding exactly as predicted. Emily Thompson watched through drone footage as the aliens attempted to contain what their protocols identified as a mass gathering. By the time their units had established a perimeter, the dancers had vanished into the underground stations, only to emerge 3 miles away and begin again. "Beautiful," Dr. Reynolds murmured, watching multiple screens showing similar scenes playing out across the globe. "They can't adapt to an enemy that refuses to act like either soldier or civilian." In Paris, a holographic orchestra appeared in the middle of a Krek's theory patrol route, playing Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. In Tokyo, thousands of civilians simultaneously opened red umbrellas, creating patterns that scrambled the aliens' visual processing systems. Each event precisely timed, each response by the enemy perfectly predictable. "Status report," Colonel Richards demanded, striding into the command center. "Phase 3 is exceeding expectations, sir," Emily reported. "The enemy's command structure is showing significant strain. Their perfect formations are breaking down as they try to respond to multiple forms of civilian resistance they can't categorize." On the main screen, a new pattern was emerging. The Krek's theory's usually flawless communications were becoming tangled with conflicting reports. Their officers, unable to classify the human response within their rigid protocols, were flooding their command channels with requests for clarification. "Look at this," Dr. Reynolds said, pointing to a signal analysis. "Their language is changing. The perfect grammatical structures are breaking down. They're being forced to create new terms to describe what they're seeing, and it's playing havoc with their translation matrices." Emily nodded, her eyes on the bigger picture. "They're learning, but in the wrong way. Every new protocol they create to deal with one form of civilian insurgency makes them more vulnerable to the next. They're writing their own defeat into their perfect system. Across the globe, the pattern repeated. In Moscow, a group of babushkas surrounded a Krexthery patrol, insisting on feeding the poor skinny creatures and completely disrupting their military protocols. In Rio de Janeiro, a spontaneous carnival parade wrapped around enemy positions like a constrictor made of music and dance. "Sir," a communications officer called out, "we're detecting a major shift in enemy fleet formations. Their ships, they're starting to break their own protocols." The main screen showed the evidence. The crystal ships were moving out of their perfect strategic positions, trying to respond to too many threats at once. Each movement created new gaps, new vulnerabilities in their previously impenetrable defense network. "They can't help themselves," Dr. Reynolds explained, his voice filled with academic excitement. "Their evolution demands they respond to every threat, but their perfect system can't categorize our actions as either military or civilian. They're caught in a logic loop of their own making." Emily's phone buzzed with updates from resistance cells worldwide. Everything was moving faster than expected. The Krexthery's perfect military machine was being undone not by force, but by an enemy that refused to fight by any rules they could understand. "Launch Phase 4, she ordered, her voice steady. "Let's show them why humans turned stories into weapons long before we invented swords." Across every communication channel, every social media platform, every broadcasting network, Operation Pandora went live. Thousands of years of human mythology, folklore, and urban legends, each carefully modified to target the alien psychology, began to flood their intelligence networks. "Watch their command structure," Dr. Reynolds said softly. "They're about to learn why perfect logic is the perfect vulnerability against a species that weaponized imagination." The screen showed the chaos spreading through the enemy fleet like a virus. The perfect predators were learning, too late, that they had invaded a world where chaos was not just a strategy, but a way of life. And in the command center, Emily Thompson allowed herself a small smile. The Krexthery had come expecting to find another civilization to perfect. Instead, they were about to discover why evolution had favored the species that could dance on the edge of order and chaos. The crystal ships hung in the dawn sky like fractured dreams, their perfect geometries now marred by spreading networks of cracks. In the Pentagon's command center, Emily Thompson watched as Operation Resonance reached its critical point. "All Symphony teams in position," the communications officer reported, awaiting final authorization. Dr. Reynolds stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the frequency analysis displays. "Their crystalline technology," he said softly, "so perfect, so beautiful, and so catastrophically fragile once you find the right resonance." Emily nodded to Colonel Richards. "Give the order." Across the globe, in every major city, hidden sound systems began broadcasting at precisely calculated frequencies. The technology was simple, just basic sound waves, but the target was the product of the Krexthery's perfect evolution. Their crystal ships, like their society, had no redundancy, no flexibility, no defense against the unexpected. First cracks appearing in London Squadron. An analyst called out. Shanghai reports similar results. The resonance is working. On the main screen, they watched as the first major crystal ship began to shatter. It started with microscopic fractures, spreading like ice breaking in spring. The Krexthery, their perfect minds unable to process this form of attack, tried to maintain formation even as their ships began to break apart. "Their command structure is collapsing," Emily reported, watching the communication patterns dissolve into chaos. "Lower ranks are beginning to question orders. They're actually arguing with their superiors." Dr. Reynolds laughed in delight. "Of course they are. Their entire society is built on perfect obedience," perfect hierarchy. Once that starts to crack, the whole system falls apart. The screens showed the evidence of his words. Krextheri ground forces, their own crystal armor beginning to resonate with the sound waves, were breaking formation. Some units retreated without orders. Others stood frozen, their perfect protocols unable to handle a situation where both advance and retreat seemed logical. "Mom," a junior officer called out, "we're picking up something new in their communications. It's fear. They're experiencing fear." Emily leaned forward, her heart racing. This was the true breaking point they'd been working toward. Not just the physical destruction of their ships, but the psychological shattering of their perfect confidence. "Show me their fleet commander's channel," she ordered. The main screen shifted to show the communications from the Krextheri command ship. The perfect, harmonious language they'd first encountered was gone, replaced by fragmented, almost panicked transmissions. How do they know? The fleet commander's voice crackled through the translation matrix. Every strategy, every formation. They're not fighting like prey. They're not fighting like anything we've ever seen. Dr. Reynolds nodded in satisfaction. And that's the final crack in their perfect world. They're realizing that everything they thought they knew about us, about combat, about the natural order of things, it's all wrong. The crystal ships were coming apart now, not just cracking, but shattering in cascading chains of destruction. Each breaking ship sent resonant frequencies through the fleet, creating new harmonics that threatened more vessels. "Their ground forces are in full retreat," Colonel Richards announced. "They're not even trying to maintain formation anymore. It's every unit for themselves." Emily watched as the perfect invasion force dissolved into chaos. The Krextheri had come expecting to find another species to perfect, to optimize, to add to their collection. Instead, they'd found humanity, a species that had turned its very imperfections into weapons. "Send the final message," she ordered. "Let's make sure they understand exactly why they lost." Across every channel, in every format, the Krextheri could receive, humanity broadcast its victory message. A compilation of Earth's greatest stories of underdogs triumphing over superior forces, of creativity defeating power, of chaos overcoming perfect order. The crystal ships began to rise, their shattered forms retreating toward space. But Emily knew they were taking with them something more important than a military defeat. They were taking the understanding that perfection wasn't just impossible, it was a weakness. "You know," Dr. Reynolds said thoughtfully, watching the aliens flee, "I don't think they'll ever be quite so perfect again." Emily smiled, thinking of all the imperfect, chaotic, beautifully human methods they'd used to win. "Good," she said. "Maybe now they can start to evolve." 3 months after the Krextheri retreat, Emily Thompson stood at the same Pentagon window where she'd first watched the crystal ships descend. The dawn sky was clear now, Earth's only visitors, the familiar shapes of birds and human aircraft. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Dr. Reynolds asked, coming to stand beside her. He looked different now, still disheveled, but standing straighter, his eyes carrying the quiet pride of someone who had helped change the course of history. "Just thinking about their last message," Emily said, turning from the window. "The one we received after their fleet crossed Mars' orbit." Behind them, the command center had been transformed into a new kind of research facility. Screens that once tracked enemy movements now displayed analysis of the changes rippling through known space. The Krextheri Empire, once a perfect machine of conquest, was experiencing something it had never known before: evolution. "They're calling it the human revelation," Colonel Richards said, joining them with fresh coffee. "Our intelligence networks say the impact is spreading through their entire society. 73 conquered species are beginning to rediscover their cultural heritage." Emily nodded, remembering the final transmission they'd received. The Krextheri fleet commander's perfect harmonics had been gone, replaced by something more natural, more real. We have been perfect for so long, we forgot how to grow. You have shown us that there is strength in imperfection, wisdom in chaos, and power in change. It's already changing how they govern their empire, Dr. Reynolds added, gesturing to one of the screens. They're starting to allow cultural expression among their client species. Some of their ships are even being redesigned with redundant systems, less perfect, but more resilient. The main screen showed images from across the former Krextheri Empire. Worlds that had been stripped of identity were blooming again with art, music, and the beautiful chaos of cultural revival. The perfect crystal cities were being modified, their rigid geometries softened by the addition of elements from local architectural styles. We've had requests from 17 different species for cultural exchange programs, Colonel Richards reported. Real ones this time, not pretexts for invasion. They want to learn how we maintained our creativity under pressure, how we turn apparent weakness into strength. Emily smiled, remembering the shock on the alien faces when they realized that every human weakness they'd dismissed, our love of stories, our cultural diversity, our tendency to question authority, had been a weapon in disguise. The scientific community is still buzzing about their technology, Dr. Reynolds said. Now that we understand their crystal ships, we're finding ways to adapt their principles while adding human innovation. Less perfect, more practical. A junior officer approached with a tablet. "Ma'am, the first reports from the diplomatic mission to their homeworld just came in. You're going to want to see this." Emily took the tablet, reading quickly. Her eyes widened. They're dismantling their conquest protocols, the entire framework they used for subjugating other species. They're replacing it with a new system based on cultural exchange and mutual growth. Better still, Dr. Reynolds said, reading over her shoulder. They're admitting they need help learning how to be less perfect. They're asking for human teachers, human stories, human art. They want to learn how to embrace chaos. Colonel Richards chuckled. Imagine that. The most perfect species in the galaxy, coming to us to learn how to be productively imperfect. Emily walked to the center of the room, where a holographic display showed the growing network of diplomatic and cultural connections between Earth and the former empire. Each line represented a different exchange program. Each point, a world rediscovering its voice. "You know what the real victory was," she said softly. "We didn't just defeat them. We didn't just survive. We showed them a better way to live." Dr. Reynolds nodded, his eyes on the growing web of connections. "That's the thing about evolution," he said. "Sometimes, the best path forward isn't becoming more perfect. Sometimes it's learning to dance in the chaos." Outside, the morning sun cast long shadows across the Pentagon lawn. Somewhere in the distance, children were playing, their laughter carrying on the wind. It was the sound of joyful chaos, of beautiful imperfection, of life finding its own way to grow. And in the great dance of the cosmos, one more species had learned that the most perfect system of all was one that had room to change.